Today we are beginning our brand new message series called You Make Me Crazy, and the reason why we are spending 3 weeks talking about this is because all of us have some crazy makers in our lives. There are so many people who have the power to make us crazy. It might be people you work with, people who live next door, might be family members, might be in-laws, might be someone seated in your row at church, might be bad, don't stare. Might be bad drivers, might be, all kinds of people in our lives have the power to make us crazy. So in this series, what we want to talk about are how to deal with the crazy makers in your life. Now, to be clear up front, we're not going to deal with all the crazy makers in your life. If we had a series on that, we would be here till Thanksgiving going through all the lists. So what we're going to focus on in this series are the crazy makers that are closest to you. Namely, the ones you live with, and if you're married, particularly the one that you are married to, because there's something about proximity to relationship that amplifies someone's ability to drive you crazy. If someone cuts you off, it might make you crazy for 5 seconds, you get over it. But if someone in your home makes you crazy, that tends to linger, because the closer a relationship, the more crazy power it has in your life. In fact, this might be a little bit therapeutic. Why don't you turn to the person in closest proximity to you right now and say, "You make me crazy." Okay, what that means is, once is enough. Well, what that means is the applications for this series are primarily going to be for family, people you live with, relationships, and particularly marriage relationships. However, the principles that we talk about, they will be transferable to all of the crazy makers in your life. So you're smart enough to figure out how it applies to someone at work or a neighbor or whatever it is. We're going to specifically talk about family. Now, another clarification before we get started, I want to tell you what I'm not talking about in this series. I am not talking about the relationships where you should end some relationships, okay? There are some toxic people in your life, and you should not be in relationship with them, perhaps. We're not talking about those. We're talking about the relationships where you should and must stay in relationship with those people and figure out how to dissolve the crazy without dissolving the relationship. Neither am I talking about abusive relationships. If you are in a relationship and you are being abused, I want you to come and talk to me, because that is not okay, and God does not want you to be abused, and we do not want you to be abused, and we will help you because we are the church, and that is what we do. We're not talking about those situations. We're talking about situations in life where, because they're family, because I live with them, because I said I do, I'm in relationship with this person. How do we dissolve the crazy that exists without dissolving the relationship? That's what we're going to focus on this morning. Now, to get started, I have a bit of a riddle. I don't know how to solve it. I want to see if you can help me. How is it that two people can fall in love, they can stand at an altar in front of a minister, and they can say, "You are the one and only for me, and I love you, and you are the only one and only for me, and you love me, and we will spend the rest of our lives together because, baby, we are so in love with one another." And 5 years later, 10 years later, they hate that person more than they hate any person on the planet. How does that happen? I mean, that seems kind of weird, doesn't it? I mean, there's so many better candidates of who you should hate in the world. You know, there's bad people out there that deserve hate more than the person you promised. I didn't say that. More than the person you promised to love. Why would you hate the person you promised to love more than any other person on the planet? That's just strange. But the reality is, you've seen this happen. For some of us, you've seen it happen to you. What is that? Or why is it, if there's a couple getting a divorce, if you were to walk up to them, or if I were to walk up to them and say, "Hey, I got a question for you. Do you think it's possible? Do you think it's possible that 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road, you meet somebody else and you fall in love and you get married again in the future? Do you think that's possible?" They would say, "Well, sure, I think that's possible." And I say, "Well, I got an idea, because I'm a pastor and everyone knows pastors are pretty smart. Why don't you two just fall in love together again and stay married, because that'll be a lot simpler and it'll be way cheaper than the path you're going down. Why don't you just do that?" And they look at you like you're an idiot and say, "Well, it's not that simple." Why isn't it that simple? Let me illustrate it this way. I have on stage with me a tube of toothpaste. Now, I'm going to squeeze this tube of toothpaste, but before I do, we're going to have a pop quiz. What's going to come out of this tube when I squeeze it? Okay? It's multiple choice to make it easy if you already lost you. Is it going to be butterflies? a rainbow or toothpaste? Well, what do you think will come out when I squeeze it? Okay, let's find out if you're right. This is going to be awesome. All right, looks like it's toothpaste coming out. Sorry, all you rainbow guessers, you're incorrect. Toothpaste came out. Now, why did toothpaste come out of here? Because toothpaste was in here. Okay, tracking with me? The reason why toothpaste, no one's writing this down. The reason why toothpaste came out of here was because toothpaste is what was in here. In your relationships, especially in your close relationships, you have the ability to get squeezed by the people who are most important in your life. In fact, the closer they are, the tighter the squeeze. And when you get squeezed in relationships, whatever is in you comes out of you. In fact, if you're taking notes, here's our first fill in the blank. Whatever is in you inevitably comes out of you. Here's what this looks like in a marriage. There's a young man, let's call him Mr. Right. And one night he's out and he meets a beautiful woman, let's call her Ms. Right. And instantly there is chemistry, and baby, they are feeling it because, well, look at him, he's Mr. Right, and well, look at her, she's Ms. Right. And they start dating, and when they start dating, they are so careful with one another. They're so gentle with the toothpaste, and she never says things that she knows will hurt his feelings. She just talks sweet, and on her dates, she looks as pretty as she can. And he wants to be a gentleman, so he always holds the door, and he always holds his gas, and he wants to look like Mr. Perfect whenever he's around her. And they're so careful around each other, and they're so still gentle. And eventually, they're so convinced that they found Mr. and Ms. Right that they get married. And then after they get married, guess what happens in their relationship? They hit a bump. And stuff comes out. And the way she dealt with this before they were married, well, he thought it was kind of cute back then, but now it's getting kind of annoying. And the way he dealt with this stuff back then, well, she thought it was adorable when they were dating, but now it's really getting under her skin. And finally, in this cycle long enough, one of them finally blows up at the other, and she says, "Oh, I didn't know you had an anger problem." And he said, "Well, I didn't have an anger problem until you started doing that to me." And she says, "I didn't know you were like this." And she storms off and she goes crying to her sister, "I didn't know he was like this." And he goes off, and we don't talk to anybody, we're men. He just goes off by himself and he says, "She just pushes my buttons. She makes me so crazy. Where did that come from?" The answer is, our family relationships and the relationships you're closest with, and especially if you're married, the closer you are to someone, the more power they have to squeeze you. It's the proximity of the relationship that determines the size of the squeeze. And in relationships, when you get squeezed, whatever is in you eventually comes out of you. See, he thinks he's going crazy because of her actions. But the truth is, she just gave a squeeze, and that's what came out. She thinks she's going crazy because of his insensitivity. But the reality is, crazy's coming out is because she got a squeeze, and that's what was in her. If you have anger coming out in your relationships, it's because anger's in you. If you have frustration or impatience coming out in your relationships, it's because impatience is in you. If you have fear coming out in your relationships, it's because fear is in you. And all of us in relationships, we bring stuff in us into the relationship. In fact, a lot of times we call that baggage. And in relationships, when we get bumped, when we get squeezed, stuff comes out of us. And the only thing that can come out of us is whatever is in us. So today, we want to start to figure out what is it that's in me that's getting squeezed out of me, and what do I do about that? To help us with that today, we're going to start by looking in Luke chapter 6 at something Jesus said about this that's pretty insightful. Jesus said, "A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart," to which everyone would say, well, of course that makes sense. If you're a good person, you're going to have good things in your heart, and you're just going to be a good person. That's going to come out of you. He says, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his where? In his heart. He says, for the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. Whatever the heart is full of, Jesus says, it's inevitably going to come out of your mouth. Now, generally speaking, we all have a pretty good filter over our mouths to keep every thought and every feeling from coming out. But Jesus said, give it time, inevitably, whatever you have in there, it's going to get squeezed out of there. In fact, your words are going to tell you quite a bit about whatever it is that you have in your heart. For example, harsh words reveal a harsh heart. Negative words, they reveal a fearful heart. Critical words reveal a bitter heart. An overactive mouth reveals an unsettled heart. Filthy words reveal a filthy heart. On the other side, the opposite is also true. An encouraging mouth reveals a happy heart. A gentle mouth reveals a loving heart. A controlled mouth reveals a peaceful heart. Jesus said, your heart has an overflow valve, and the overflow valve is on your face, and whatever comes out of there, that's just an indicator of whatever it is that's going on in here, and that's especially true when we get squeezed, whatever is in us, it just comes out of us. Now, with that being true, we're going to go back to the Old Testament to look at something that Solomon wrote about this. Solomon wrote a book of the Bible called Proverbs, and if you're not a Christian, I think you owe it to yourself to go home, go online, open a Bible, read the book of Proverbs, because even if you don't believe in God, you will read the book of Proverbs and say, wow, that's just helpful. That makes me more competent at life. There is so much wisdom in there. Solomon, who had all this wisdom to share, he says, here's what you need to know when it comes to being wise in your life. He wrote, above all else, in other words, in addition to everything I have to tell you. And he wrote a book of the Bible called Song of Solomon, which you should not read before you're married because it's like the R-rated book of the Bible. He wrote Proverbs, which have all this wisdom for life. He wrote Ecclesiastes, which you shouldn't read unless you're over the age of 40. And he said, above everything else I have to say to you, here's what's most important that you need to know if you are going to be a wise person. Above all else, he said, guard your what? What did Jesus say? The good man brings good out of his heart. The evil man brings evil out of his heart. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth talks. So he said, above all else, here's the most important thing, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Everything in your life has a source. It has a headwater, and that is your heart. Some translations say that your heart is the wellspring of your life. It is the source. Everything emanates from your heart. Now, as Americans, when we think of the heart, we think of Valentine's Day. We think of feelings. We think of emotions. We think of lovey-dovey. Now, we get this idea from the ancient Greek philosophers, actually. The ancient Greeks believed that human nature is a dichotomy of body and soul. And the body is where the feelings and the passions reside, and the soul is where the reason resides. And that's why the best thing they said that could happen to you is you can die and you can be free from the lower emotions, and then you can be a truly enlightened, rational being like Dr. Spock on Star Trek. That was kind of their goal and angle. Kind of depressing if you ask me, but they didn't ask me. I wasn't alive. So we get that idea that the heart is the source of emotions from them, but that's not what the biblical authors had in mind when they talked about your heart. When they talked about your heart, they talked about the epicenter of your mind, your soul, your body, your very being, and the essence of who you are, the epicenter of who you are. And in your heart, there are things that are valuable and important to you. There are things that your heart looks to and says, if I have that, I'm somebody. If I can do that, I'm significant. If I have that, I'm secure. If I have her, if I have him, then my life has meaning. But if I don't have that, if I don't have him, if I don't accomplish that, if I don't achieve that, then I'm insecure. Then my life doesn't have meaning. Then I will be afraid. In your heart, the epicenter of everything that you are, there are things that you love. Now, you might say, I love watching football, and I love eating pizza, and I love going to the beach, and I love the weekend, and I love vacation, and I love my kids, and I love God, and I love sermons, and I love summers in Wisconsin. You know, there's all these things you love in your heart. I mean, thousands of them, right? And you have an order to those loves. There's more important things that are more central to your identity, security, meaning, and purpose. And there's things that have absolutely nothing to do with your identity, purpose, meaning, security, any of those things. And whatever is most important to you, whatever is the most valuable, whatever you love most, Solomon would say, your entire life is going to flow from that. For some people, making money isn't a good thing, it's the ultimate thing. It's at the center of the heart. For some people, having kids isn't a good thing, it's the ultimate thing in the heart. For some people, accomplishment isn't just a good thing, it's the ultimate thing in the heart. For some people, looks, physical beauty, it's not just a good thing, it's the ultimate thing in the center of their heart. And what happens is, when you have something in the center of your heart, your entire life is going to be thrown in that direction. It will be shaped by whatever is most important in your life, in your heart. And if you have something at the center of your heart other than God Himself as the most valuable, the most important, guess what's going to come out when you get squeezed? Anything besides God is vulnerable. Your job is vulnerable. Your money is vulnerable. Your family is vulnerable. Your looks are vulnerable. Your accomplishments are vulnerable. Which means if what you love more than anything is threatened, you're going to have fear and anxiety coming out of your heart. If what you love more than anything is something besides God, it will not forgive you if you fail it. God will forgive you if you fail Him. Your job won't. Your money won't. A lot of people won't. Which means you'll be feeling worried, insecure, guilty, restless. Solomon says if you do not pay attention to what is at the center of your heart, you're going to be surprised at what comes out of you when you get squeezed. And in fact, you'll be so surprised you will blame it on the people you live with, rather than being a wise person who said, I'm going to guard, I'm going to pay attention to my heart and what I truly love more than anything, because everything flows from the heart. But when you're going crazy with the crazy makers and you're all fired up, we don't pay attention to the heart. What do? We point fingers. I wouldn't be mad if you didn't. I wouldn't be upset if you didn't. I wouldn't feel this way if you hadn't. Well, if you would get off the couch, well, if you would stop saying those things, well, if you would come through like you said you would, if you would mean it when you say you're sorry instead of just saying, I'm sorry, if you would, then I wouldn't have toothpaste coming out of me when I get squeezed. But what if God is at the center of your heart? What if God is more important than anything? You see, both atheist philosophers and Christian theologians agree on something. As human beings, we are looking for something that is glorious to merge our lives into. Something glorious for meaning, for security, for satisfaction. And if God is that something that cannot be taken, something that cannot be shaken, something that cannot fail us. If God is at the center of your heart, do you know what comes out when you get squeezed? Godliness. If God is at the center of your heart when you get squeezed, love will come out. Joy will come out. If God is at the center of your heart and you get squeezed, peace will come out. And the reason why love will come out, why joy will come out, why peace will come out, why patience will come out, why kindness will come out, is because that's what's in there. Because God is in there. And that's what's going to come out when you get squeezed. So instead of falling into the trap of pointing fingers and blaming and saying, you make me crazy, and if you wouldn't, then I wouldn't, let's be wise people for a moment, and let's recognize something important. Ending crazy starts with me. Ending crazy, it doesn't start with their behavior, doesn't start with their words. It starts with me because it starts in my heart. That's where ending crazy begins. So what do we do with that? What do we do with, okay, if it starts with me, that's not as much fun as blaming for the record, but okay, what does that look like if I have stuff being squeezed out of me and I go, whoa, where'd that come from? What do I do with that? Here's what David tells us. King David said, "Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me." David was the father of Solomon, who wrote, "Guard your heart." And what's interesting about David is in the Scriptures, we are told that David was a man after God's own heart. The Bible doesn't say that about anybody but David. He was unique. And as you look at the life of David, what you see is that what he loved with a passion was God. The glory he wanted was God's glory. David had no problem saying, if I look like a fool, but God is glorified because of it, I'm going to look a fool. I have no problem humbling myself, humiliating myself, passionately pursuing God's beauty, God's glory, God's greatness. I want people to worship God. I want people to give glory to God. David was all about God. No matter the season, no matter the circumstance. But then David entered a season of life where his heart slipped, where the loves of his heart became disordered and he fell into sin. And when he came back, he realized that my problem is not on the outside, it's on the inside. So he prayed, "Create in me a pure heart, O God." I need to go to God to get a pure heart. And the good news is, that's what God does. He gives a pure heart. In fact, when Jesus, Son of God, came to this world, he got squeezed. He was arrested, even though he committed no crime. He was tortured, even though he was innocent. And he was crucified for sins and crimes he did not commit. And when he was squeezed, when he was tortured, when he was being nailed to the cross, do you know what came out of him? Forgiveness. He said, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." Because when we squeezed Jesus, what we found inside was a God of unconditional love, a God of unconditional grace, a God of incredible sacrifice for people who did not deserve it. And he did that for our sins. He did that for you. He did that because at the center of Jesus and at the center of his heart was his love for you. And so when we need a pure heart, we go to him to give us a pure heart. So when crazy crops up in your life, whether it's someone distant or someone you're married to, and someone's pushing your buttons, and someone's getting at you, how do you deal with crazy when it pops up? Here's what I want to leave you with today. Here's how you deal with crazy. First question is this: is everything okay in your heart? Before you we are experts at monitoring other people's behavior. Let's start monitoring our hearts. Before you tee off, before you say, "Why'd you do that again?" is everything okay in your heart? What's going on in your heart? Now, most of us were not taught how to do this as children. Most of us as children were taught how to monitor our behavior and modify our behavior, not how to guard our hearts, okay? Let me tell you something. I only had to get spanked 3 or 4 times by my dad before I learned not to throw 2x4s at my brother when my dad is around, okay? It was real easy to modify my behavior. Okay, you only have to get your mouth washed out with soap by your mom once or twice before you realize there are certain words you do not say when your mom is in earshot, all right? You only need to get sent to the principal's office once or twice before you say, "I need to get smarter when I'm going to do something naughty." We learn how to modify our behavior. When you were dating, you learned how to modify your behavior. If you want a job, you learn how to modify your behavior. If you want to keep a job, you learn how to modify your behavior. This is not behavior modification. This is about you getting alone with God and asking the question, is everything okay in my heart? What's coming out when I get squeezed? Am I angry? Am I holding a grudge? Am I resentful? Am I jealous? Is everything okay in my heart? Their behavior is wrong, granted, but I'm the only one who has the power to make me crazy. I mean, that's what's coming out of me. If crazy's coming out, it's because crazy's what's in. Is everything okay in my heart? Then, 2, name what comes out of you. Okay, you think it's all rainbows and butterflies. Guess what? That's not what's coming out all the time. What is it that's coming out of you? You need to name it out loud, maybe not in the middle of an argument, but just to yourself later. Name it out loud. What came out of you when you got squeezed? Name it. It's anger. Well, that's a little general. Get beneath it. What is it? You know what? I'm angry, but I guess if I think about it, I just really feel disrespected. I really feel inadequate for the position I'm in. That's really what it is. I thought I was just afraid, and I am, but really, it's because I feel inadequate. You know, what's coming out? I'm jealous. Because I get so mad when I see those people who can fit into that size dress, and I can't do it, and I just get mad at them. It's jealousy. That's what's coming out of my heart. Maybe it's insecurity. Maybe it's greed. What is it that's coming out of your heart? You need to name it. And the reason why is it's going to be hard to clean up what is in your heart unless you know exactly what is in there. And you don't know what's in there until you get squeezed and it comes out of you. So when you get squeezed, okay, before you just blow up at the other person, you have an opportunity to learn what's in your heart. You have the opportunity to guard your heart. So name what is coming out of your heart. And when you name it, it will begin to lose its power in your heart, and it will begin to lose its value in your heart. And then you do what David did, part 3. You ask God to create a pure heart. Say, God, I don't need to modify my behavior. I've been trying that for years, and I still have stuff coming out of my heart. God, I need you to give me a pure heart. And here's how that looks practically. You meditate on the grace and love of Jesus Christ. You reflect on the fact that though He was rich in heaven, for your sake He became poor so that you can become rich with heaven. You reflect on the fact that although He was a Son of God, He became a Son of Man so that we as Son of Men can become the children of God. And as you meditate on that, you will see with increasing clarity what David saw, that Jesus is beautiful. That Jesus is glorious, that Jesus is sovereign, that Jesus is grace, that Jesus will not leave you, that Jesus will not forsake you, that Jesus will be with you always to the very end of the age. And if Jesus is for us, who can be against us? And as you see that, your love for Jesus grows. And the value of Jesus in your heart begins to grow. And as your love for Him grows, He becomes more central in your heart, and the more you get squeezed, the more Jesus comes out. The way to get a clean heart is by focusing on Jesus. So, rather than focus on what other people are doing that's making you crazy, what's going on in your heart? Is everything okay in there? Are you naming what's coming out and reflecting on Jesus and His grace to give you a clean heart? That'll get us kicked off. We'll pick it up there next Sunday. Let me pray for you. Father in heaven, part of living in this world means there are some people that are going to make us crazy from time to time. I ask that we would be wise people that don't focus on their behavior, but focus on what's coming out of us and why it's coming out, because nothing can come out that wasn't already in there. Father, all of us have sin, all of us have baggage, all of us have insecurities, and they grow out of our hearts. So my prayer for everyone listening this week is that we would have the wisdom to guard our hearts, to pay attention to what's in there, to what comes out of there, and that we will have the courage to invite you into that part of our heart, that our love for Jesus would grow so that we would be a people that when we are squeezed by the people we love, your love and your forgiveness and your grace would pour out of us, because that's what's in us. This is going to lead us to the relationships we love, and we trust you that this will honor you, and we trust you that this is going to dissolve the crazy in our lives. So Jesus, bless us to this end. We ask it in your name. Amen.